I sat on a wooden bench outside Vanderbilt University Hospital, gripping my hands so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The spring breeze carried the faint smell of blooming dogwoods, and sunlight glimmered across the hospital's glass front. But none of that comfort reached me. Behind those walls, in the ICU, my husband Daniel Carter was fighting for his life against something we never imagined. People walked past me, their voices soft and casual, talking about everyday things. For a moment, I wished I could be one of them, just another woman enjoying a warm day, chatting about dinner plans or what flowers to plant next. But that wasn't my life anymore. My world had shrunk to a single hospital room and the constant beeping of machines keeping Daniel alive. Daniel used to feel invincible. He could work a 12-hour shift building custom furniture and still come home with enough energy to cook dinner and ask me how my day had gone. His smile had this quiet magic. It made you believe things would turn out okay, even on the hardest days. He was my comfort, my steady ground. Now, watching him slip away, I felt like I was sinking into quicksand. 6 months ago, we believed we had decades ahead of us. We talked about trips we couldn't afford yet, a bigger home for the kids we still hoped to have, maybe even a dog someday. Then one evening, Daniel walked through the door looking pale and worn out. He blamed it on a long day, but the fatigue didn't go away. It got worse. Strange bruises appeared. Some nights he could barely catch his breath. Then came the diagnosis. Words that didn't feel real. Autoimmune plastic anemia. His body was attacking his own bone marrow, shutting down the very place where blood is made. Without a stem cell transplant, the doctors said there wasn't much hope. I pretended to stay strong for him, squeezing his hand and whispering, "We'll get through this." But every night I cried in the bathroom, pressing a towel to my face to hide the sound. Because I knew something Daniel didn't. He didn't have family. No parents, no siblings he knew of. He'd grown up in foster care, always alone. And without close relatives, finding a donor match was nearly impossible. We signed up for the National Registry, but the doctors were straightforward. The wait could take months, even years. Daniel didn't have that long. Earlier today, his doctor pulled me aside, and his words crushed me. "Emily, we're running out of options. If we don't find a compatible donor soon..." He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. I understood exactly what he meant. I sat outside afterward, tears running down my face, feeling completely powerless. I'm a nurse. I've spent my life helping people heal, yet I couldn't do anything to save the man I loved more than anything. My mind wandered to our life together, our little wooden house on the edge of Nashville, the rocking chair he built for me for our first anniversary, the framed note by the kitchen door with his handwriting, "You are my always." The thought of losing him was unbearable, and still, deep inside, a quiet voice told me I might need to prepare myself. I hated that thought. I hated that grief was already starting to wrap itself around me. And then, just when it felt like the world couldn't be any crueler, I overheard something. A few words from a conversation nearby. Words that would change everything. I met Daniel on a night when life felt simple, warm, and full of possibility. Long before hospitals and medical charts took over our days, life was simple. I had just finished my final exam in nursing school, completely drained but finally free. My friends insisted we celebrate, so they dragged me to a small cafe in downtown Nashville. It wasn't anything fancy, an old brick building, creaky wooden floors, and the warm smell of roasted coffee that stayed in the air. I remember the moment he walked in as clearly as if it happened this morning. Daniel was holding a paper bag filled with hardware items from a nearby supply store. His jeans were dusty from work, and he had this calm, grounded presence about him, the kind that makes you stop and look twice. When our eyes met, he gave me a shy smile and asked if he could sit across from me. We ended up talking for 2 hours straight about anything that crossed our minds: his love for building furniture, my dream of working in pediatrics, how we both hated olives but couldn't resist peach cobbler, and when he laughed, really laughed, his eyes crinkled at the corners. Something inside me clicked that night. I just knew. From that evening on, Daniel became a steady part of my life. He showed up with little surprises: a jar of honey from a roadside stand, a simple bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in butcher paper, a book he remembered me mentioning once. He had a way of making ordinary moments feel special. 2 years later, we stood beneath an old oak tree, saying our vows in front of our families and friends. I wore my mother's pearl earrings, and Daniel cried openly the moment he saw me walking toward him. He never hid his feelings. He believed in loving fully and honestly. We bought a small wooden house on the edge of town, a fixer-upper Daniel swore he could manage. And he did. Weekends were spent sanding floors, building shelves, and crafting things with his own hands. For our anniversary, he made me a rocking chair. That chair still sits on our porch, holding memories of countless nights spent rocking side by side, watching fireflies light up the Tennessee dusk. Life felt full, even with its imperfections. The only thing missing was children. We started trying soon after the wedding, convinced it would happen quickly, just like it seemed to for everyone else. But month after month passed, and nothing changed. Doctors explained that my body wasn't cooperating, that natural conception might not be possible. We tried treatments, hormone injections, endless appointments, and eventually, IVF. The first attempt failed. So did the second. Each negative result left me feeling more defeated, as though my own body had betrayed both of us. But Daniel never blamed me, not once. On nights when I cried until my head ached, he would wrap his arms around me and whisper, "Emily, this doesn't change how much I love you." He even suggested adoption, talking with hope about all the children who needed homes and how we could still build a family. I wanted to embrace that idea. I tried. But a part of me still longed to see a child with his blue eyes and the crooked half-smile he had when he was trying not to laugh. One day, after yet another failed cycle, I collapsed in his arms, sobbing and apologizing, telling him, "You deserve a wife who can give you a family." He gently lifted my chin, looked right into my eyes, and said, "Emily, I didn't marry you for children. I married you for you. You are my family." That was who Daniel was: steady, compassionate, and endlessly patient. He could have grown angry, bitter, or distant. Instead, he chose love over and over again. Looking back now, I see how those heartbreaks prepared us for what lay ahead. The nights we comforted each other, the dreams we adjusted together, they became the foundation we would need to survive the storm that was coming. Because when Daniel got sick, our world fell apart. Even as he grew weaker and paler, he tried to stay strong for me. He joked about the hospital food, teased me for worrying too much, and kept saying we would get through this the same way we had survived everything else. But deep in my heart, I knew this was different. This was life or death. And I wasn't ready to imagine a life without him. It began so quietly that we didn't notice at first. Daniel would come home from the shop earlier than usual, brushing off his tiredness with a smile. "Just tired," he'd say. "More work tomorrow." But I should have known something was terribly wrong. "Long day, that's all," he'd say. But the exhaustion didn't ease. It settled deeper, like something unseen was weighing him down a little more every day. Then the bruises started. At first, they were small, marks you might get from bumping into a workbench. But soon, more appeared for no reason at all, deep purple spots spreading across his arms and legs. One night, I woke to the sound of Daniel struggling for air. He was sitting up, clutching his chest, gasping like he couldn't pull in enough breath. The nurse in me knew instantly this wasn't normal. I begged him to see a doctor. When he finally agreed, I convinced myself it would be something simple. Maybe he needed vitamins. Maybe stress was getting to him. But instead of reassuring answers, we were sent to a hematology specialist who ordered every blood test possible. I will never forget the moment the results came in. The doctor sat us down, his expression far too serious, his voice steady and careful. "Daniel, you have aplastic anemia. It's rare, and in your case, it's severe. Your bone marrow is shutting down." It felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. Daniel, calm as always, simply nodded and asked, "What do we do?" The doctor's response was both straightforward and devastating. "You need a bone marrow transplant. Without it, your body can't produce blood cells. The best chance is a donor match, usually a sibling or close relative." My heart sank. I looked at Daniel, silently wishing he would say there was someone, but I already knew the truth. Daniel had grown up in foster care. He didn't know his parents. He didn't know if he had siblings. He had no relatives to turn to. No one. We signed up for the National Donor Registry right away, but the doctors didn't sugarcoat anything. Finding a compatible stranger could take months, maybe longer, and Daniel didn't have that kind of time. The illness moved fast. His skin grew pale. His strong hands shook when he tried to lift a cup. The same man who used to build furniture late into the night now struggled just to walk from the couch to the kitchen. Even then, he tried to shield me from worry. He joked about the awful hospital gowns. When his hair began thinning from the treatments, he teased that he'd always wanted to know what he'd look like bald. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him quietly praying, not for himself, but for me, asking for strength. I held his hand whenever he was admitted and forced myself to smile. "We're going to beat this," I'd say. But inside, fear was eating me alive. I couldn't imagine waking up without him. I couldn't picture an empty house, or a future he wasn't in. One afternoon, after another long round of transfusions, the doctor pulled me aside. His voice was soft, but his words hit like a blow. "Emily, we're running out of options. If a match doesn't come through soon, I'm afraid he doesn't have much time." I nodded because I couldn't speak. I felt the tears burning behind my eyes. I had seen death before. Working as a nurse, you face it more than most people ever will, but nothing prepares you to lose the person you love more than anyone. I walked out to the hospital courtyard, desperate for air, desperate for something solid to hold on to. That's when I heard it. Two hospital employees were taking their break nearby, chatting casually, unaware their voices carried to where I stood. "You know that guy in ICU, Carter? He looks just like this guy who lives out in Pine Hollow. I swear, it's like looking at the same person." My heart stopped. Pine Hollow. A small mountain town just a 2-hour drive east of Nashville. Could it be nothing? Just chance? Or could it mean Daniel had family out there? Someone who might be a match? For the first time in weeks, something flickered inside me. Hope. Fragile, trembling hope. But hope all the same. I stood frozen, their words echoing in my head. "He looks just like this guy who lives out in Pine Hollow." Pine Hollow was the kind of quiet town where people waved at passing cars and life moved at its own pace. I'd only been there once during nursing school for an outreach program. It wasn't remarkable, but it was the sort of place where families stayed for generations. Could it really be a coincidence? People resemble each other all the time, but something deep inside whispered that this was different. Daniel had been abandoned at birth and placed into foster care. He grew up never knowing whether someone out there shared his blue eyes or the same crooked smile he had when he tried not to laugh. He used to wonder if somewhere in the world there was another person with his face, someone who might share the same blood. I remembered the time he almost tried to search for his biological parents. We were sitting on our porch one warm summer night when Daniel admitted softly, "Sometimes I think about trying to find them. But what if they didn't want me back then? Why would they want me now?" There was a quiet hurt in his voice, one I didn't know how to take away. So he pushed the idea aside and focused on our life together. He always said family was something you built with love, not just something you were born into. But now, family wasn't just a sentimental idea. It could be the difference between losing him or saving his life. That night, I barely slept. I stayed at Daniel's bedside, holding his hand while the machines beeped softly around us. His skin looked washed out, his breathing thin but steady. I leaned close and whispered, "I'm going to fix this, Danny. I don't care what I have to do." The next morning, I walked into work and requested emergency leave. My supervisor, a kind woman who had watched our situation unfold, didn't hesitate. She simply hugged me, signed the form, and told me to go. I went home, packed a bag, and tried not to think about how terrified I was. I didn't know the man's name. I didn't know if he truly existed. All I had was a rumor about someone living in Pine Hollow who supposedly looked just like Daniel. No plan, no guarantee. Just one picture of my husband on my phone, and a fragile thread of hope. Before leaving, I stopped by Daniel's room. He was awake, and even in his weakened state, he smiled when he saw me. "You look like you're about to take on the world," he joked lightly, though his voice was tired. I pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Maybe I am," I whispered. He tried to ask what I meant, but I shook my head. "Don't worry about it. Just rest. I'll be back before you know it." I couldn't tell him about Pine Hollow. Not yet. I didn't want to give him hope only to crush it if everything turned out wrong. The drive out of Nashville felt dreamlike. The city slowly faded behind me, replaced by narrow country roads lined with early spring, wildflowers. The land rose into gentle hills, and soon I was crossing the old wooden bridge leading into Pine Hollow. I whispered a prayer as I entered town. "Please let this be real. Please let there be someone who can save him." I parked outside a small general store and stepped out, clutching my phone like it was the only solid thing left in my life. Pine Hollow moved at its own quiet rhythm, farmers loading feed bags, an elderly woman sweeping her porch, children racing down dusty streets on bicycles. I studied every face, searching for Daniel's jawline, his eyes, anything that felt familiar. Inside the general store, I approached the clerk, a man in his 50s with kind eyes. "Excuse me," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm looking for someone. I don't know his name, but people say he looks like this." I showed him the photo of Daniel. The clerk's reaction was immediate. His eyebrows shot up. "You're probably talking about Luke Henderson. Lives out by the cornfields on County Road 6. Yeah, he does look like that." My heart skipped a beat. "Could you give me directions?" He did. I thanked him quickly and hurried back to my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I drove toward County Road 6 with my heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the sound of the engine. I didn't know whether this Luke Henderson was actually related to Daniel, but I had to find out. The road was little more than old, cracked pavement snaking through tall pines and open fields. A light drizzle began, turning the world into a soft blur. I slowed as I spotted the weathered mailbox with fading white letters, Henderson. The house behind it was old and worn, surrounded by rows of corn stubble and muddy tire tracks. A rusted swing swayed in the wind, and somewhere out in the fields, a dog barked. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my pulse thudding in my ears. What if I had made a mistake? What if I was about to knock on a stranger's door and completely embarrass myself? But then I pictured Daniel lying in that hospital bed, weak, frightened, but trying not to show it, squeezing my hand with what little strength he had left. I got out of the car. The wooden steps creaked under my feet as I climbed to the porch. I knocked softly at first, then again, louder this time. After a moment, the door opened. A man stood there, taller than I expected, broad-shouldered but slightly hunched forward, with dark blonde hair that fell messily across his forehead. And his eyes. My breath caught. They were the exact shade of blue as Daniel's. The same shape. The same bright, piercing intensity. He blinked at me, cautious. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep, rough around the edges, like someone who wasn't used to talking to strangers. My hands trembled as I held up my phone, showing him the picture of Daniel. This is my husband," I said. "His name is Daniel Carter." People in town kept saying, "You look just like him." Luke's brows pulled together as he stared at Daniel's photo on my phone. Seconds dragged on like minutes. His expression shifted slowly, first confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked like old, buried hurt. He finally exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I'll be damned." When he looked back at me, the sharpness in his eyes had softened. "Who are you?" "Emily. I'm his wife." Luke stepped aside immediately. "You'd better come in." Inside, the house was simple. Wooden floors, worn but clean furniture, and the faint mixed scent of coffee and motor oil. He pointed to a chair. "Sit down." "So, you're saying he's your husband?" I nodded tightly, hands gripping my bag. "He's in the hospital. Very sick. He needs a bone marrow transplant. They told us he has no relatives. But then I heard about you and..." My voice cracked. I had to try. Luke sat across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the photo still in his hands. He shook his head slowly. "I think he might be my brother." Those words hit so hard that for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Your brother?" He nodded again, more certain this time. "Our mom. She wasn't really mom material. She had a bunch of kids, most with different dads. When I was little, she had another baby. A boy. She said she wasn't keeping him. Signed the papers at the hospital and walked out. I was too young to stop anything, but I never forgot. I always wondered what happened to him." He covered his face with both hands. His voice shook when he spoke again. "I never even knew his name until now." My eyes filled with tears. Daniel has spent his whole life wondering if he had anyone. He thought he was completely alone. Luke's jaw tightened. Then he suddenly stood up. "I'll do it. The transplant. I don't need time to think. He's my brother. If I can help him live, of course I will." He grabbed his truck keys from the kitchen counter and came back. "When do we leave?" For a moment, I could only stare at him. I had prepared myself to explain everything, to convince him, maybe even beg. Instead, he made the decision in seconds, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. We left Pine Hollow that same evening. Rain had thickened into steady sheets, sliding down the windshield as Luke followed behind me in his old pickup. For the first time in months, a weight lifted off my chest. There was still fear. There always was. But now, there was also real, solid hope. At Vanderbilt University Hospital, I led Luke through the bright, sterile hallways to Daniel's room. Daniel was awake, propped up by pillows. His face was pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. Then they shifted to Luke, and narrowed in confusion. None of us spoke. Daniel just stared, mouth slightly open like he was looking at a mirror from another lifetime. Luke stepped forward, voice thick with emotion. "I think I'm your brother." Daniel blinked quickly, tears building almost instantly. "My brother." I stood quietly as the two of them, men who had been strangers just a day earlier, looked at each other with a recognition deeper than anything I could describe. Daniel lifted a trembling hand, and Luke gripped it firmly. "We'll talk later," Luke said gently. Right now, I'm here to save your life. The doctors rushed everything. Daniel's condition was getting worse and they didn't want to waste a single minute. When the hematologist finally walked into the waiting room with a tired but relieved smile, my whole body went weak. "He's a strong match," she said. "One of the best we've seen in a long time." I turned to Luke, eyes overflowing with tears. "Did you hear that? You're a match. You can save him." Luke's face shifted between shock and fierce determination. "Then let's do it." "When do we start?" Luke asked, his voice steady and sure. That evening, Daniel and Luke finally had time alone together. I waited just outside the door, wanting to give them space, though I could still hear their voices drifting out. Soft, emotional, unsure at first, then slowly warming as the minutes passed. I heard Daniel's voice break as he whispered, "I used to dream about having a brother. I always felt silly for it, like wanting a house you'd never get to live in. But you're here. You're real." Luke let out a quiet laugh, though I could hear the heaviness in it. "Life had different plans for us, I guess." There was a pause. Then Luke added, voice cracking, "I'm sorry I wasn't there, Danny. I didn't even know." Daniel squeezed Luke's hand with surprising strength for someone so weak. "You don't have anything to be sorry for. You're here now. That's what matters." When I finally stepped inside the room, Daniel looked at me with wet eyes and whispered, "I have a brother. I'm not alone." I kissed his forehead and murmured, "You never were." The procedure was set for the next morning. I barely slept a minute. My mind kept jumping between hope and fear, imagining every possible outcome. Luke, on the other hand, was calm. He even joked with the nurses while they prepared him for the donation. "Never thought I'd be giving my bone marrow to a guy I met yesterday," he teased, then glanced at Daniel and added quietly, "But I'm glad it's him." The hours moved painfully slow, but eventually the transplant was done. Everything went smoothly. Daniel was taken to a recovery room while the new stem cells began their life-saving work. I sat beside him, holding his hand, watching the warmth return to his skin. For the first time in months, there was actual color in his face. Later, Luke walked in, looking exhausted but at peace. Daniel reached out and grabbed his arm with a weak but grateful grip. "You just gave me a second chance," he whispered. Luke smiled softly. "Well, I guess we're even. You gave me family." This time, I couldn't hold back the tears. For months, I'd carried nothing but fear and loneliness. But now, sitting there with these two men who had found each other against all odds, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Outside the window, Nashville's skyline glowed under the evening lights. I realized how quickly life can swing from despair to hope, from loss to something beautiful, sometimes in just a matter of days. For the first time in so long, I let myself breathe fully. I let myself believe Daniel might survive. And I understood that we had been given a gift far greater than anything we dared to ask for. The days after the transplant felt like stepping into a different world, one where hope finally outweighed fear. Daniel's body started responding well. Every morning, I looked for the smallest improvements, a little more color in his cheeks, a steadier voice, a firmer squeeze of my fingers. Luke stayed close the entire time, sleeping in an old pull-out chair in the waiting area whenever hospital rules kept him from staying in Daniel's room overnight. He never once complained about the long nights or the uncomfortable chairs. One evening, I brought him a cup of coffee and found him standing at the window, quietly watching Daniel through the glass. There was a look on his face I'll never forget. Soft, overwhelmed, almost disbelieving. "He's really my brother," he murmured, like he still needed to say it out loud to believe it. Daniel's strength returned, little by little. One cool autumn afternoon, he took his first steps outside since the transplant. I stayed close, ready to steady him as he moved slowly along the hospital's garden path. Sunlight filtered through the changing leaves, casting warm patches of gold around us. "I forgot how good fresh air feels," he whispered, squeezing my hand gently. A week later, Daniel was released from the hospital, and we finally returned to our small wooden house on the edge of Nashville. This time, Luke followed behind us in his old pickup truck. No longer a stranger, but a part of our lives now. The house felt different the moment we stepped inside, fuller, like it had been waiting for this missing piece to return. In the weeks that followed, Luke became a regular presence. In the evenings, he and Daniel sat on the porch talking, Daniel sharing what he remembered from different foster homes, and Luke filling in the pieces about their mother, their early years, and the siblings Daniel had never known existed. One night, Luke handed Daniel a small, worn pocket knife with their father's initials carved into the handle. "It's the only thing I have left of him," he said quietly. "I want you to have it." Daniel held it with trembling hands as silent tears slid down his cheeks. Even Pine Hollow reached out. People we'd never met sent cards, prayers, even casseroles when they heard Daniel's story. Many notes ended with messages like, "Family is everything. Hold each other close." Their kindness, coming from complete strangers, felt healing in a way I hadn't expected. It reminded me that even in the darkest seasons, there were good people everywhere. Months passed, and Daniel grew stronger. His hair began to come back, his laughter returned, and he slowly started working in the garage again, building furniture with the same spark he'd always had, just at a gentler pace. One evening, he led me outside to the porch, where a brand new rocking chair sat, crafted by his own hands. "For you," he said simply. I sat down, rocking softly as tears blurred my vision, the familiar creak of wood wrapping around me like a warm hug. We brought Luke into our routines, too. Sunday dinners became a tradition, filled with joking, stories, and a quiet sense of gratitude. Sometimes I'd catch Daniel and Luke trading small smiles across the table, like they still couldn't fully believe they had found each other after so many years apart. One especially golden autumn evening, Daniel and I walked along a tree-lined road near Pine Hollow, our hands intertwined. Leaves danced in the wind around us. Up ahead, Luke was laughing, carrying his best friend's young daughter on his shoulders. Daniel squeezed my hand. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think being an orphan meant I'd always be alone, but I was wrong. I have you, and now I have him too." I looked up at him, feeling the truth of those words settle deep inside me. "Family isn't always about blood, Danny," I whispered, "but sometimes it is. And when it is, it's beautiful." Later that night, we gathered around a small bonfire behind Luke's house. The flames flickered gently, lighting up everyone's faces. As I leaned my head on Daniel's shoulder and listened to Luke tell a story from their childhood neighborhood, something washed over me, a calm certainty. We were going to be okay. Life had broken us down, yes, but it had also put us back together in ways we never expected. Piece by piece, it had given us something stronger. With my eyes closed, the sound of the crackling fire in my ears and Daniel's warm hand in mine, I realized something powerful. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, right at the moment you're about to lose hope.